Welcome to the latest edition of First Take UK podcast. Delighted to welcome back Chris Wassel from the HockeyWriters.com. First of all, Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing very good, Stephen. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. We spoke about a week ago when we looked at the Atlantic Division, and tonight we're going to be sitting here talking about the Pacific Division.
Yeah, how about that? We go from almost one coast right to a place that actually people don't even realize this about me. I lived there for 4 years. I lived in the beautiful Hotel California for almost 4 years, and I lived to actually tell the tale.
This is it. So you was out west. I've not ventured out west. My wife doesn't really have any interest in going out west because she's from the Texas area and lived in Florida. West Coast doesn't interest her at all. So I don't even know if I'll ever get out to that part of the world.
Yeah. For people that don't know also, being that I drove cross country twice, I can say that if you're going through Texas, you must stop at the steakhouse in Amarillo, where the 72-ounce steak is really as good as advertised. And if you can eat it and all those trimmings in about an hour, you might be able to make some money on top of the shirt and everything else that you get along the way. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, if you're going to have a decent steak, then go to Texas. Nothing over here comes anywhere close. I found that out when I've been over to Texas, and I just eat as much steak as I can eat in the time I'm over there, and then worry about how I'm going to feel like when I get back.
No, you'll be fine in a few weeks.
Yeah, after the meat sweats and everything else, but it's all good fun. I love doing it. I would not change it for the world. I'm too much of a steak fan to even consider not doing that when I go over to Texas. So it's part of my tradition when I go over there.
It's a lot of fun. It was definitely a different experience for me, at least. I went through in March, and even in March it was warm there, which is unusual because the Panhandle has very wild weather, much like the part of California I lived in. You could have 80-degree weather one day, you could have 20 degrees and snow the next. So.
You just reminded me of my last trip. I went there, I think we were flying back something like the 3rd or 4th of March, and we had 80 degrees on the Friday, and then on the Saturday a ice storm came in.
Yep. And
we had to then drive to the airport the day after the ice storm when it was still pretty bad, and yeah, that was a pretty ropey drive back to Dallas Airport, which should have taken about an hour and a half, and it took about 3 hours.
Yeah, it's never. Unfortunately, anytime you get winter weather down in the south, expect lots of adventure and delays.
Yeah, it's not fun at all. But moving on to the divisional preview, but something I did want to just touch on before we get on to the Pacific is that the Islanders have made a couple of moves in the last few hours or so. What do you make of the moves that they've made?
I'm not surprised. This is all right. For one, this is the Islanders. Two, they realize, crap, we got to make the playoffs. We have to find a way to make the playoffs. I'm more interested in the Nick Leddy move. I'm sitting there as I speak to you now and looking through and going, oh, I need to drop this Islanders defenseman because Nick Leddy is obviously going to take that role, so he's out. That's the bigger move for me. The other stuff, I'm not really too concerned or keen about, just simply because of the fact that, to be honest, what this team needed more than anything else was a healthy, reliable power play quarterback. And Nick Leddy does do that. Defensively, well, that's another question. But the Islanders obviously did this because they feel that, look, Lubomir Visnovsky is on the other side of 35. He's headed towards, well, you don't want to say it, but he's headed towards retirement. And probably sooner rather than later. what happens is, as a result, you obviously need somebody that's young that you can somewhat rely on the power play. They don't have a guy that can do that yet. So why not bring a guy in? He has some history of being a pretty good player on the power play. And, gee, he gets to dish to guys like Tavares and Oposo. That's pretty good. I mean, I certainly wouldn't complain. Yeah, some of his numbers will go down, I'm sure, but most of them will go up. So, and more importantly for the Islanders, that in this day and age, you almost need a power play that's near 20% to make the playoffs. You really do. Unless you're the Bostons and Chicagos of the world where you don't really need it, a team like the Islanders absolutely needs it.
No, without a doubt. I mean, the power play in this day and age can make such a difference. Special teams, keeping them out on the penalty kill, putting the goals in the net on the power play. It can decide so many games over the course of a season. So I completely agree. I think that the power play is so key for the Islanders if they are going to struggle elsewhere on the ice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and they're not the only ones that have made some moves today. Boston put a few players on waivers today, but most notably Johnny Boychuk to try and pass him through to see if maybe somebody will take him to, well, let's put it this way, lighten their salary cap burden.
Yeah.
So you're going to see a lot more of that. Tuesday at 5 p.m. is the deadline, Steven, so I kind of expect more of these types of moves. Even the Devils today, they sent down highly regarded prospect Reed Boucher, which was a bit of a surprise to most, but it's not the more hardcore Devils fans and media, because this just means that Lou Lamoriello is going to do his annual shell game to get under the salary cap. Well, not get under, but get under with a cushion.
Yeah. So. Yeah, this is it. I mean, teams are trying to get under that salary cap, but it's going to be an interesting few days as we head towards the start of the season. But let's move on to the Pacific Division. Before we go into it in more detail, and we discussed this last week with the Atlantic Division, how does this division compare to the others in terms of overall strength?
Last year, obviously, this was the division. And it was mostly because of the three teams at the top, LA, San Jose, and Anaheim. It was a brutal Southern California gauntlet every time you went out west. And it still is, to a point. You look through, and even the rest of the teams, Calgary has improved some. Vancouver couldn't be any worse than it was last year. Everything that could have went wrong did. You start looking further down the list and you go, all right. Calgary, Vancouver, some other certain teams that you just kind of float around and you think about and you go, wow, maybe they're not that bad. And it's where it gets fun. Because obviously, with the Pacific Division, again, it's the top three teams are pretty easy to figure out. It's just a question of what order, and you really can make a case, Steven, for I would say two of the between say LA and Anaheim. You can make a case for either team could win the division this year. LA is obviously riding the wave of winning the Stanley Cup. Thank God they beat the Rangers. But here's the thing. You can still make a case for Anaheim, even though, and this is important, here's the thing. Anaheim had an unusual amount of luck last year. Let's be honest. Let's just call it for how it went. Anaheim had just a ridiculous amount of luck. It didn't hurt that they had three goalies that were basically NHL caliber. That helps along the way. But they basically could sit there, Steven, and put out 12 forwards that could score 15 goals or more. Easily. You don't get that very often in the NHL. This year's a little bit different. They had to bring it. They had to try and find a first line left winger. I still believe it's in house, but let them find out the hard way. It's where the fun is at this year is the three teams. LA, obviously, we have to see how they'll defend. There's a few injuries with LA right now that people might want to keep an eye on, particularly one. I don't want to say I told people so, but yeah, it's possible. Calgary's improving. Edmonton, we think they're improving, although I saw a video last week where apparently 4 players went to 1 in the defensive zone, and it didn't end well. So, again, expect fireworks amongst the top. And then there's a middle tier, and then there's, and that sort of, hey, they're going on the golf course. Teams are going to be pretty surprising this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. I mean, you have got the 3 teams at the top, and you have got the other teams in that division. So let's start at the top. Let's start with the team that finished first in this division last year, the Anaheim Ducks, and you've obviously mentioned about the luck along the way. But before we touch on that, would it be strange this season not seeing Solane out there for the Ducks? I mean, he's finally not in the NHL, and he's finally decided he's going to hang up his skates from the NHL and move on to pastures new. I mean, I don't know so much about whether they're actually going to miss him that much this year, because obviously I think his performance has gone down in more recent years, but I still think it's still kind of strange not seeing him out there.
It'll look a little odd at first, I'm sure. It kind of wasn't a secret that Bruce Boudreau realized the coach realized the end was there. Not the end was here. The end was there for Teemu Solane. And you could see the way his minutes were just kind of ratcheted down and down and down, and his power play time was brought down more and more as the year went on. And his production started to suffer, and then he would have to be a healthy scratch here and there. And he just kind of knew. And the team basically started to prepare as to life without him while he was still there. And I know that in his book, Teemu Solane did rub kind of some of the players still there the wrong way a little bit, particularly Ron Getzlaf, who wasn't too keen on Solane's comments. But all that is just swept right under the rug right now. It really is. I mean, you hate to be cliche about it, but to the Ducks right now, they're worried about defending the division crown. They have life without Jonas Hiller, which may be a little bit more of a interesting transition, because now you have 24-year-old Frederik Andersen, who's going to be the starter, and you have a even younger John Gibson as his backup.
In terms of that in terms of that tandem, I mean, can that tandem get the job done this season?
Well, based on the last third of last season, they sure can. There is no doubt that they can. They had better numbers. Jonas Hiller, unfortunately, was tailing off. His numbers reflected that. It's weird now because we have such a high standard of what a good save percentage is in the NHL. Yeah. And basically, it's almost to the point where 914, 915 is average. Yeah. And 20 years ago, that would have been Vezina Trophy caliber. So
completely agree.
It just goes to show you that no matter how many rules the NHL tries to come up with to increase scoring, it's still trending towards the goaltending. And Hiller, I think, had about a 911 save percentage, and over the last maybe third of the season, he was barely at 900. And you knew the writing was on the wall. You had, like I said before, you had 3 guys on a one-way contract. Someone had to go. And it was likely going to be Hiller. They were going to take a shot with 2 guys under the age of 25. And there's nothing wrong with that. They have enough offense and enough firepower to make this work. They can score over 3 goals a game. They're in a pretty easy division, let's be honest, aside from the two teams that will be challenging them for the title. They're in kind of a good position. They play well against the East. They play pretty well against LA for the most part. And they seem to have kind of a mastery against San Jose. So it helps. They're the perfect regular season team. And to be honest with you, Steven, there were probably one or two unlucky breaks from maybe winning the Stanley Cup last year. They have the team. They have the talent. They have up-and-coming defense. It's going to come down to, can they all put all three phases together in the playoffs?
No, I completely agree. I mean, this is one of those teams that was built to win a Stanley Cup, and for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out for them last season. And in the off-season, they've added Ryan Kessler. What will he bring to the team?
Pacific Division. How are you? You're just gonna hate Ryan Kessler so much. You've already been introduced to him, so you know what you're going to get. He is the perfect second line complement on this team. He can play the power play. He can play shorthanded. He can drive people nuts. Worse than Corey Perry does. I have to emphasize that. But most importantly, his two-way game is an immense asset for this team. And it's something that really Anaheim did not have last year in the playoffs. Yeah, their first line could play great two-way hockey. But once you got down, you kind of could find holes at least. And if Ryan Kessler stays healthy, and that's a big if, he's had a few injuries and had a bit of a falling out with the coaching staff last season and the media in Vancouver. But if basically he stays healthy, keeps his head on straight, that's a nice 60 to 65 points or more that you're getting from your second line center. And you're getting a presence in the playoffs. And that's something that you can't put any price tag on.
No, it's a hell of an addition for them. He wanted out of Vancouver, and now he's found himself a home in Anaheim. So where do we put Anaheim in the division? I've got them in second in this division.
This is where it gets fun. Because I'm rolling on faith, and maybe a little bit of blind faith at that. But for some weird reason, this still seems to be the healthiest team in the division. And sometimes that's enough. I have them just barely finishing first against the team that you probably have as first in the division. So it's going to be close. It'll be fun. That's for sure.
No, without a doubt, it's going to be a hell of a run, and it's one of those things that will potentially take it up to the last couple of days or so to finally figure out which one of these two teams are going to win the division. But before we get to the other team, let's touch on the team that finished second in the division last year, the San Jose Sharks. And this is a team that's been to the playoffs 15 of the last 16 seasons, and yet they've not been in the Stanley Cup Finals once. What is the issue?
In a word, management. It's management. It is strictly management. It's rough. It's cold to say. You don't want to say it. But you have to ask the question, why is your general manager here right now? Why is your coach still coaching this team? It's two questions that have to be asked by every single Sharks fan, Sharks media, even the Sharks owner. How do you let these two guys still have any kind of influence on this team? They should have been gone. They should have been gone. There is no way you blow a 3-0 lead the way that they did. And it's not as if this hasn't happened before under their watch. That's probably the most alarming thing. Never mind the other things that happened in the summer, Stephen, where you had the captaincy stripped, you had all sorts of trade rumors. Your highlight signing was John Scott. Yeah. Never mind all that stuff. The fact that Doug Wilson and Todd McClellan are still on this team in a management role is scary.
No, I completely agree. I mean, there's so many things that are wrong. You cannot be that consistent, and then when the games are on the line, especially last season we had a 3-0 series lead against the Kings, and things just all of a sudden just blow up, and they can't manage to progress. I mean, they weren't the only team that had the Kings on the brink of elimination last year. That's a fair statement.
Yeah,
but
everybody did.
Yeah.
Except for the Rangers, everyone did.
Yeah. I mean, the puck goes a different way in some of those games against the Rangers. You know, maybe the Rangers win one or two or even three of those games, but you just don't know. But I mean, somebody's got to be held accountable, and it's almost like the franchise can just get through the regular season, no problem, and then when it gets to the playoffs, it just the mentality of it, the players maybe just don't. I don't know if they don't believe that they can go any further, or just the way things are run. It's quite incredible, and it just makes me have the same concerns around this team going into this season that I think, again, we talk about them being one of the top three teams in this particular division, but that's as far as it goes. I can't make a case for this team in the playoffs.
No one can. And here's the other problem, too. You have an almost persistence to play a goalie that's probably you don't know what you're going to get. Antti Niemi last year is a perfect example. The first 30 games, he was one of the top 3 goalies in the NHL. I know this because, shamefully, yes, he was on my fantasy hockey team. And then the second half started, and his save percentage plummeted probably down into maybe amongst the 30 starters, probably somewhere in the bottom third. And this team struggled to win games at times. At times. They still won enough. I mean, Antti Niemi still, I think, wound up with almost 40 wins. He won 39. But for that last month of the season, and I remember this well, I don't know how many times he gave up. He gave up 3 or more goals, I think, in 12 of his last 18 starts. 4 or more in 7 of his last 11 starts. That's not good. That's not getting it done in the playoffs. Now look, the Western Conference playoffs were unusually high scoring last year. And we saw it throughout. I mean, there were goals coming from everywhere. But still, you have a goalie presumably in the wings in San Jose. Or at least some people in San Jose think they do. I don't know if Alex Stalock could handle a full load this year yet, but he's getting close. And Niemi's not getting any better, or we think he's not getting any better. And you combine that with the changes in personnel, and they're supposedly going to a younger emphasis. And you have a recipe for significant problems in San Jose.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, I mean, it's significant problems, but I mean, because of the way the rest of the division, you can't make a case for them dropping anything lower than third, I don't think, in the regular season.
No.
I mean, even if things go, okay, injuries and everything else you can't obviously take into account at this stage because you just don't know what might happen. But I can't make a case for them going any higher than third, same as I can't make a case for them going any further, maybe than potentially the first round in the playoffs, because I think the Western Conference playoffs are going to be really, really tough. It's tough on both conferences, but I think the Western Conference playoffs, they can be found out very, very quickly. But is there anything that they could do in the playoffs, or anyone that could step up, or anything that could be changed to try and get this team through a round or two in the playoffs?
This year, I think the only way is if they put everything aside and just they have to go full bore and full tilt. It's almost like health and bodies be damned, and this team has never done that. The one year they did was 2011, and I still remember this. Even then, they just weren't good enough. Vancouver did beat them on a Kevin Bieksa 371 bounce goal to win the Western Conference Final. That's the closest they've actually gotten to the Stanley Cup Final. And it hasn't gotten any better since. It really hasn't for them. They have the talent. They have the power play. They have the one thing that has slipped off with San Jose that most people don't notice, and the numbers don't necessarily bear it out, Steven, but you may see it this year more. Their penalty kill has slipped off. And their normally good possession numbers have slipped back a little bit as well. If you combine that with the fact that Joe Pavelski had basically almost a 40-40 season last year on an insanely high shooting percentage, and you have some of these guys that are coming off really good years that normally maybe didn't have them before. I mean, look, Pavelski is a perennial 60-point player. So he's not going to drop off the table unless something catastrophic happens. But he's going to drop off enough that it's noticeable.
Yeah.
Logan Couture is going to be about the same. Their wild card on that team right now is Tomas Hertl. If he can stay healthy, that may be the only way that they could do any damage in the playoffs, is if Hertl can stay healthy a whole season. Because the first month he was unbelievable last year, and then the injuries started.
Yeah, and again, injuries can play such a big role over the course of the season, and then going into the playoffs. So, I've put them in third. Obviously, don't want to speak for yourself, Chris, but I would imagine that's where you've probably put them.
I have them in third. I have actually Alex Stalock taking over the starting reins late in the season for them.
Yeah, and then come to playoffs, I think they were first round elimination.
Yeah,
unfortunately. So moving on to the third team from in this division, the team that finished third and also went on to win the Cup last season, the Los Angeles Kings, a magical ride to the Stanley Cup, filled with many elimination games, and then one of the best Stanley Cup finals, I think. I mean, 3 overtime games, and Los Angeles did eventually come out and win that particular cup. I suppose the big question is for them is can they repeat and actually retain that cup?
The way they won it 2 of the last 3 years suggests no. And only for this reason. It's a tough road. It's a very tough road to win the Stanley Cup these days. But it's even more so for an LA team who, well, let's be honest, they don't slack off during the regular season necessarily. But they do play it a little differently than most. And you can't always turn it on in the playoffs. I know what I'm saying is sacrilegious because there was a player that made a career out of it in Claude Lemieux, who absolutely did just about nothing in the regular season worthwhile for the most part. And then in the playoffs, it was like, where is it? Marian Gaborik did kind of the same thing last year with the help of Anze Kopitar. I mean, Marian Gaborik scored 14 goals in the playoffs, Steven. 14.
Yeah, incredible.
I believe 4 or 5 game winners, a bunch of goals in the power play, a bunch of goals in key situations, and most importantly, he beat his former team for him. And it's not a secret that was in his head from minute one in that series. And Marian Gaborik had 12 hits in 5 games against the Rangers. Marian Gaborik don't hit anyone. That's all you need to know. But he definitely found a connection with Anze Kopitar. Anze Kopitar is one of the most underrated centers in this league, period. By far and away. I still have nightmares of 2012 of him just going through the entire Devils team and scoring in overtime in Game 1. And he's that kind of player where if, say, he didn't have a more defensive role, maybe Sidney Crosby can take a hint of centers like, say, Taves and Kopitar have taken a more two-way role, if you will, and didn't perhaps cry as much, that he would have more Stanley Cups. But this is why a team like the Kings, they have a captain in Dustin Brown, but the real captain in leadership lies with Anze Kopitar.
Yeah.
And that's important. They have up-and-coming players. They have an excellent defense led by Drew Doughty, Slava Voinov. I mean, you look at some of the guys on this team, Jake Muzzin, Tyler Toffoli, guys that are young. They have such a young core for their depth. That a guy like Mike Richards can play on the 4th line if he's a little out of shape. A guy like Jeff Carter, who's perfect for the playoffs, doesn't have to score 40 goals during the regular season because they play a good enough defensive system, and they have Jonathan Quick in net, who will be healthier than in years past because he actually had the surgery earlier for once and not later. So there's a lot of moving parts with LA, but the bottom line is there's a reason why LA is kind of a sexy pick to win the Pacific. And it's because people think, okay, Anaheim can't quite be possibly as lucky as they were last year. And we know what San Jose is going to do. So it's a process of elimination. So I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what it is for me. I think Anaheim will take a slight step back. No confidence in San Jose, so Los Angeles kind of comes the divisional winner by default out of these particular 3 teams. I mean, they've shown in the past where they don't have to win this division to go on and win the Stanley Cup. They don't need to. They've gone in the Stanley Cup as a lower seed and then really turned it on even more so in the playoffs. I mean, talking about a guy like that, I mean, Jonathan Quick has been tremendous in the playoffs. Just incredible at times. And the question for you around Jonathan Quick is, where does he currently rank compared to other netminders in the history of hockey almost, in terms of his playoff performances and what he's been able to do?
It's weird because last year the numbers will throw you off a little bit. It wasn't that he was wildly inconsistent. He was hurt. I mean, he had a broken bone in his wrist. Not particularly easy to heal as you're trying to, win a Stanley Cup. But I think last year he gains more, almost in a sense, figured points for gutting it out the way he did and finding ways to win. It's not a secret that Jonathan Quick is an over-aggressive goalie. There's even sort of a little black book on how to beat him as a goalie, and yet it didn't work. He was able to do just enough. He was able to perform really well when it counted against the Rangers. Everybody remembers that Game 3 where by all rights the Rangers probably should have won. Yeah. And he made a few saves early that set the tone for that entire game. And from there, that was it. You knew the series was over, even though, yes, it went 5, and yes, it required an overtime. Part of the reason why that series went as long as it did was because of LA. It wasn't because of the Rangers. It was because LA sometimes, for whatever reason, goes into a brain lock that can't be explained. So.
No, I mean, I thought Los Angeles would win that finals more comfortably in the end than they actually did. I didn't think it would take the overtimes. I couldn't make a case for the Rangers winning that cup.
Yeah. It was funny because, like, 2 years ago, in stark contrast, the Devils and Kings were pretty even. They were basically kind of mirror images of each other. It's just the only difference was on one side you had a 40-year-old goalie at the time. And then you had Jonathan Quick. That was really the only difference. Both teams played the same basic way. They had young players that were on their way up. They had their one franchise player. Actually, the Devils had two. It's just the one didn't show up, and he's gone, ironically. But the Rangers had kind of the same thing going for them a little bit. But the difference was there were stretches where they had been manhandled so badly by Pittsburghs of the world. Even Montreal played pretty even with them despite injury. So, to be honest, they even got outplayed by Philly at times. And there was no way on earth Philadelphia should have ever taken that series to 7. So it's kind of how it is in the NHL, Steven, where there's no dominant team anymore. There's a series of dominant teams, but not the team.
Yeah. This is it. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, you've got probably maybe 4 or 5 teams that you would immediately throw into the hat of a potential Stanley Cup champion, and then you got the rest. But yeah, in past years, certainly in the time that we've been watching hockey, you've sometimes had a truly dominant team. They're the team to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what makes it. It's what makes hockey fun, and it's why I have LA in a very close second. And the only reason why I do is it's like that nagging sense of me that Jonathan Quick is going to unfortunately have an injury at some point during the year, because he has the last 3 seasons. So it's a little bit of hesitant. There's a little hesitant nature of me that says I can't do it, but they probably are the best team in the division. And there is one other thing that people listening to the show will want to know, and that's that Marian Gaborik is injured again. He's day to day, but it's a legit muscle pull. Just keep an eye on it early in the season, because I wouldn't be surprised if you see an IR trip at some point for Gaborik with either a groin or an ab muscle pull. So.
It's on the cards. I mean, I think the main thing for Los Angeles will be a case of, like it is for a lot of teams around this league, is to get your key players healthy, not injured, come the playoffs, and then see what happens then when the playoffs take place. But yes, I've got them winning the division, as we talked about. It's more of a case of elimination rather than anything else. But now moving outside of these 3 teams and moving down to the team that finished 4th in the division last year, they were the Phoenix Coyotes, and now the Arizona Coyotes as we go into this season. And the first question around this team is there enough scoring on this team?
Wow, I mean, I think the big thing with Arizona is now you lost Radim Vrbata. And Vrbata was a pretty big piece. I think he's going to play an extremely vital role in Vancouver this year, especially if he plays with the Twins. But that's a deceptively huge loss for them. They do have 2 defensemen that probably could come close to 60 points this year. But if your defensemen are leading your team in scoring, that's not the way to go, generally. There's a lot of things wrong with Arizona right now. Martin Hanzal is probably their most talented forward, but he's slumped over the last couple of years, particularly last year with just a series of nagging injuries. So he's had problems. You You look at Michael Boddicker. Is he ever going to break out? I don't know. You have guys that they don't have everybody's favorite enforcer, Paul Bissonnette anymore. So they're going to have Kyle Chipchura will now have to fight more. This is what I'm getting at, folks. They can score goals. Dave Tippett's done a remarkable job in finding ways to squeeze goals out of this team. Mm-hmm. But I've got to be honest. You're right, Steven. There's just real concerns all over the place. Their penalty kill was iffy last year. Mike Smith, very ordinary in net. Thomas Greiss to Pittsburgh, their backup. I mean, there's a lot wrong with this. I mean, Mike Smith might have to play 7 games this year. I don't think Mike Smith has that in him. He's been very healthy the last few seasons, which before that was very unusual. And when you just combine all these factors, fourth? Yeah, last year, yeah. This year, ouch.
Yeah, I mean, we'll touch on the placings in a moment, but I'll say straight away I haven't got them up as high as fourth this season. Is it overly optimistic to even expect Mike Smith to get back to anywhere where he was, say, for argument's sake, back in 2011, 2012?
It's tough. I mean, I'm looking at this now. It kind of reminds me of how Cam Ward was over the last few years. And then last year, it just... Not in a health sense, because obviously Cam Ward's knee and name other insert body parts that have gone wrong. In this case, it's more just defensively, Arizona. It's still fun to have the go back and forth with it, but they just don't have enough. They just don't. I mean, I'm looking up and down this team roster, Steven, and I don't see it. I just don't. You know, Marty Erat was a space case, you know, in Nashville and in Washington. I mean, he can produce 50 points from anywhere, but that's about it. Here you go. The final insult to injury and why they will not finish fourth without any uncertain terms. Can you really trust any team that has Devin Dubnyk as your backup goalie? Out of 80 goalies last year, he was 75th overall. 75th. There are AHL goalies that are probably better. But this is the thing. I mean, this team has some nice players. That, you know, Shane Doan is still pretty relevant. Laurie Korpikoski's not a bad third liner. Sam Gagner, I suppose, if he ever finds his way, is still a 45 to 50 point player. But that's the problem. They have too many of these guys that are nice second/third line players, and they do not have first line talent on this team at all. They just don't.
And it's too much to expect guys that are second and third line talent to be first line scorers. You just cannot expect it in this league. And I've not got them in fourth. I've actually placed them down in sixth in this division.
That's actually about where I put them. I cannot see them in any way, shape, and form coming close to the playoffs because this is a year of absolute transition for them. They're going to find out a lot about themselves, and it's not going to be good.
No, this is it. When you talk about that, I think it's always a common phrase. You find out a lot about yourselves, and yeah, that's right. I mean, some of these things you might not want to see, but it's going to be hopefully a brutal wake-up call that they just haven't got the talent, and they've got to find ways to get that talent onto this franchise to then try and make a run back into the playoffs. it's harsh. It's harsh, but it's unfortunately the way things are. So before we kick Arizona any further and stomp on them any further into that ground, let's move on to the team that finished fifth in the division last year, and that was the Vancouver Canucks. You touched on it earlier on that pretty much nothing went right for his team. And I mean, what did you make of Tortorella as a coach?
It's kind of sad in a way. He's not a bad coach. He really is not. I mean, look, the turning point in the season, unequivocally and unfortunately for Tortorella, was that Calgary game where everybody fought.
Mm.
It really was. It just got so ugly after that game. But that was the turning point. At that time, Vancouver was in the playoffs. I mean, granted, it was early in the season. It was like 30 games through or so. But Vancouver was a playoff team, and they looked like they would still, even then, hold on to – probably if that incident doesn't happen, I think they're probably a playoff team. They're probably were like an 8th seed. But nonetheless, that's still in the playoffs. And after that incident, after Tortorella was suspended for the rest of December, that team was just not right at all. They just weren't right. Nothing went right. There was no communication between the AHL squad and Vancouver themselves. The Sedin twins were injured, although some people will say that they deliberately kept themselves out of the lineup on several occasions. They just did not want to play for Tortorella. They obviously could not. I mean, they traded Roberto Luongo away. They brought in Eddie Lack, who actually was not bad at all. But everything that could go wrong. Alexander Edler was a minus 39 last year. Edler's not that bad. Yes, he has a liability defensively at times. He's not that bad.
No. I mean,
that's the depth as to how ugly Vancouver became last year.
No, without a doubt. I mean, that's an ugly number, and everything did go wrong for Vancouver. I mean, you talk about the Sedin twins there. I mean, what can we expect from them this season? Obviously, there's a new coach in charge now. Are they going to bounce back?
They're definitely going to bounce. There's no doubt they're going to bounce back. I think what we don't know is how much. And like I said, with the Arizona preview, Radim Vrbata is probably the key to their success. Vrbata offers an ability that I don't think that the Sedin twins have seen a while, since maybe to a lesser extent a more talented Ryan Kessler to a point. Vrbata can't get under your skin like Kessler could, but Vrbata can set up the Sedin twins probably better. Even better than, obviously, Alex Burrows. Interestingly enough, and this is eerie and weird in of itself, Vrbata, as hard as it is to believe, is 33 years old. I don't think people realize this. Vancouver is older than people think. By a good bit. They do have some younger players, but if you start looking up and down their lineup, as an example, the Sedin twins are 34.
Yeah.
Vrbata's 33. Burrows is 33. Higgins is 31.
It's not a young team.
It's not as young as it looks. Bieksa is 33. Yes, Alex Edler is only 28, but he's an old 28, to be honest. Okay. You start going further. Yes, their defense is a little young, but if you look between Hamhuis, Edler, and Bieksa, that's a lot of hockey between the three of their top three defensemen. I understand they have younger players. Their goalie is 34, going on 40.
Yep.
In Ryan Miller. We saw Ryan Miller completely undressed in the playoffs last year against Chicago, and especially over the last 15 games with St. Louis. Can Ryan Miller bounce back? There's a lot of questions here. But there's a lot of reason for optimism, too. There's an absolute conundrum here with Vancouver. We don't know.
No.
Other teams in the division, we have an idea. Hey, they're trending down. They're trending up. Vancouver, it's going to be fun.
Yes, this is it. It is the uncertainty. I mean, take a guy like Ryan Miller. I mean, what Ryan Miller are we going to see in Vancouver? If we get the Ryan Miller that did have those very poor games towards the end of that regular season and then unravelled in the playoffs, then Vancouver have got themselves a netminder that isn't really going to help them. But if Ryan Miller is the Ryan Miller that we've seen at other times and being a very, very good netminder and Team Canada and everything else, then that's completely different.
It kind of laughably comes down to this. If everything breaks right for Vancouver, they probably finish fourth, and they're coming very close to third. And that requires almost everything to break perfectly. If Ryan Miller goes completely south and Eddie Lack has to play a bunch, and you have a goaltending controversy, and the Sedin twins start to take games off again, they're probably going to finish sixth. Fourth, sixth. I got coin here. Flip it up, and as nutty as it sounds, I really want to pick them in fourth, but it's one of those. I could flip two teams right off the bat and go, all right, one of these two teams is going to finish in fourth, but I do think it's going to be Vancouver, barely, just because I can't see them falling too much, and they're kind of in a position in the division where that from position 1 to 23, they're better than the bottom four. They're the best of the bottom four teams in this division.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I've got them. Before anyone jumps all over me, Ryan Miller, Team USA, not Team Canada. I've got them in fourth. But the problem I have with them being in fourth, I still can't put them in the playoffs because I've still got, over in the Central, I've still got Dallas and Minnesota in those two wildcard spots. Yeah. So that's where I'm falling with those. So although I've got Vancouver moving up and perhaps, certainly having a better season, they won't have as bad a season as they had this season from their point of view, but I still can't quite put them in the playoffs. I suppose the big thing is for them to make that leap into the playoffs. What must go right for them?
They have to have basically a season where Ryan Miller has a save percentage of near .925. He has to have a start he basically has to play like he did in Buffalo last year.
Yeah.
He has to play like he did in Buffalo in Vancouver from game one right on through. The Sedin twins have to come close somewhere between 70 and 80 points. They have to bounce back to their old numbers and quickly. Vancouver has depth scoring. Even that has to come up because unfortunately last year everything sunk. So guys like Zach Cashin are going to play an extremely vital role in this team. He has to find a way to break the 35 to 40 points somehow. He just does. He has the talent. It's put up or shut up time for guys like him. And for quite a few guys on this team. You know what you're going to get defensively from this team. You have three guys that probably can produce 40-plus points. And they're going to have to come damn close. I mean, even Alex Edler is going to have a ridiculous bounce-back season. And I think he can. I can't see why not. It couldn't have gone any worse. So this year might be kind of a sort of Murphy's Law situation for this team where everything that went wrong, maybe it'll go mostly right for them.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's going to happen. But yeah, unfortunately, I think they are going to miss out. So moving on to the team that could potentially flip-flop with them in this fourth and fifth position, from my point of view, it's the Calgary Flames. And how is their rebuilding going?
Better than probably anyone expected. And you can't say it's under the radar anymore because of Bob Hartley and what happened, last year with Vancouver. It made you notice, my God, they've got some players. And to think, if Mark Giordano doesn't go down with an early season injury, how much better that team would have been even. Mark Giordano is probably a top 5 defenseman in this league, and no one knows about him. That in of itself is a little bit surprising, but not really. It's kind of how it often works in the NHL. You make that leap, people slowly start to notice you. You make too big of a leap, everybody notices you, and the spotlight is on you a little bit more. It was not a secret last year that Calgary was done in by god-awful goaltending.
Yeah.
And they brought in Jonas Hiller to stabilize that. And there's a part of me that thinks that Hiller is going to be able to do this enough. Is Hiller the guy with the 920 plus save percentage of old? No. But is he as bad as he was in the second half last year? Certainly not. There's no way. He's a much better goalie than shown. For this team, it's simply going to come down to health. And look, I know they spent an insane amount of money on Derek Engelland, and everybody's still laughing at that contract. Wait, hold on. I just heard laughter coming from everywhere. But no, you're right. This team has the potential. Oh, by the way, Johnny Gaudreau should make this team. And last I checked, there is talent. I think he's better than Jonathan Drouin is this year. I will go out on that limb. I will go out on a limb and call him the Johnny Hockey and not Jonathan Drouin just yet. I think Drouin is a year or two away from. I think this year will be a little tougher for Drouin just because of the division he plays in. I think at least Gaudreau benefits from having enforcers around him or players that can protect him, and he'll be able to do kind of what he needs to do. You have players on this team that are more than capable. Yuri Hudler can score 60 points. Mason Raymond was a nice find for Toronto. He wound up obviously in Calgary. Chris Wassel is a surprisingly good defenseman. Dennis Wyman can still play decent minutes in this league. Ladislav Schmid is a nice shutdown defenseman. He came over from Edmonton. Matt Stajan is a nice top 6 possibility. I mean, you have players, you have pieces on this team. And that's something you can't even say with Vancouver. You have Sam Bennett, who I think is probably a year or two away. But the bottom line is you have players. You don't quite have that with Vancouver. Vancouver, you have a lot of aging talent. And it's why I really was torn on this. I was extremely torn. I wanted to make Calgary fourth. Because I think they have even a slight chance of challenging for a playoff spot. Sean Monahan had a 20-goal season last year as a rookie. Nobody thought he was going to make the team last year in training camp. And he had a brilliant last week of training camp. And then goes and scores 20 plus.
See, best case scenario for the Calgary Flames for me, they're the team that surprises a hell of a lot of people in the Western Conference. And it's very difficult. I would have loved to have put them in fourth. But I've just, kind of like erred on the side of caution and gone for the more experienced team, which may not necessarily be the best way of going about it. It is very difficult at times because obviously this is a younger team, and sometimes these players can just elevate their games and not sometimes they're not necessarily not aware of what's going on around them, but they don't quite know how good they can be, and yet they just perform night in, night out. They could, for me, maybe be this year's Colorado, be the team that makes a jump, and it wouldn't surprise me if we're looking at the end of the season that Calgary haven't got into a playoff spot.
They're close. They're definitely knocking on the door. They'll be within 10 points of a playoff spot, no question about it. They just need a goaltender to develop in their system. That's what they need more than anything. They can get that. Then I'm really interested in seeing what they can do as far as upside, because they have the pieces amongst their forward and defensive core. There's no question about that. They're going to need the goaltending in a year or two, and that's why I have them in fifth. It's just they don't have quite enough. They don't know how to win yet. They're still young enough. They surprised people last year by finishing as high as they did, and they'll continue to surprise people a little bit more this year. But they just don't have it enough in them to make that bigger jump yet.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think they're for me could be one of the funniest teams to watch this season over in the Western Conference. And yeah, I mean,
I got one funnier coming though.
Moving on to the final team in the division, the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, when can Oilers fans expect this franchise to get back even get back into playoff contention, let alone into the actual playoffs itself?
How about 500 as a viable goal first? I mean, you never want to sit there. I think I said this on radio a couple weeks ago, and this was even before the whole Kutchev fiasco that they had last week. There's something wrong with this team. I can't explain it. They have so much potential. You look at the players, and then the season starts, and it's like, wow, where did it all go wrong? Because in training camp, it looks promising. You have top six talent. You have players that look like they're getting in better shape, and then it all goes wrong. This year, they have goaltending for once. They have Ben Scrivens in that. They have Victor Fast backing them up. It looks like they have something decent going. And then I saw something the other night where they have 4 players going to a forward that's a third-line forward. I couldn't believe this. Steven, I wish I had the player's name on top of my head, but I know it was not a top 6 player. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? Don't you realize that there's 2 guys wide open in the crease? And basically they could have just sat there and said, hey, you take it. No, you take it. No, you take. And yes, they scored, by the way, obviously, but it's kind of the problem with Edmonton. For everyone that says, oh, that Craig McTavish is such a brilliant, GM the last 12 to 18 months, and while he has had some very good moves, this team kind of is where they are because their top talent has no clue or no brain cells at times as to what they're doing. They are so immensely talented. It's like the old baseball analogy of a player with $1 million arm and a 2-cent head. And unfortunately, at times, hockey sense-wise with Edmonton, you see that over and over again from their management right down to their players.
It's not a great situation when you think about what this franchise was once like, and now we look at what the modern day franchise is. I mean, this is a poor team. I've got them finishing last in this division. I just with a sane head, I can't make a case for them finishing anything above last place. And I suppose from that point of view, what are the bright spots for Edmonton this season?
The bright spots is you have to think that their top line is going to improve defensively at some point. You would think that it's going to happen. I hope it's going to happen. I pray it's going to happen, because it has to. These guys have been together for too long. I mean, they don't have a second line that's worth anything. I'm interested to see what they do with certain players. I still can't believe that Mark Fane is somehow a top 4 defenseman in this league. He will be for Edmonton. As a matter of fact, I think he will be on their first pairing, which I'm laughing hysterically as a Devils fan, because the best thing I heard the other night was, that was a howitzer from Mark Fane, and I'm like, no. The guy can barely shoot 50 miles per hour on a good day. I don't think the guy has a howitzer in him. They have nice players. They have nice complementary players. They have nothing in the middle, though. They have nice first-line players, and they have nice fourth-line players. Even their defense, awful. Justin Schultz is probably a better forward than he would be a defenseman. I think Justin Schultz would make a really good center in this league. But defensively, Edmonton, whatever they're teaching their players, it just doesn't work. Jeff Petry's not very good, let's be honest. Their defense is their clear weak spot, without any doubt. And they've tried to make strides in improving it, but when you're playing Nikita Nikitin over $4 million a year, Steven, that's not the way to improve your team. I mean, I understand they have to overpay a good bit to acquire free agent talent, but I don't see it. They have potential. They're going to improve. They're going to have a better record than last season. They're not going to be in the Connor McDavid sweepstakes. I think their accomplishment this year is coming very close to 500, and I do think they can do that. But unfortunately, in that division, that's still not good enough to get out of the cellar.
No. I mean, you got Arizona in 6. I mean,
and they're probably a 500 team.
Yeah, and you'd have to think they'd have to play very, very well above what we think they can do to even knock on Arizona's door, and certainly not anything else above that. So yeah, I mean, Edmonton are going to be in the cellar, but that's another division wrapped up. And for ourselves over here at the First Take UK podcast, that's all 4 divisions now in the books. And a big thank you to yourself, Chris, for discussing the Atlantic Division previously and also the Pacific Division tonight.
That's never a problem at all, Stephen.
Big thank you there to Chris Wassel. You can find him at Chris Wassel THW on Twitter. I've been at Stephen FTUK for at UK First Take, and it's a good night from me.